pleasure of being one of the product advocates for the OAE and Evoke Potential product lines here at Otometrics. And there I am, and there's Anders, who you just heard, and he'll be the moderator for the session today. So please enjoy, and we'll try to make it as informal as possible and hopefully allow you a good opportunity to learn about preschool hearing screening. And one thing I thought was really interesting about today's presentation is we had a lot of people sign up for it today, and we had more than 20 countries interested in this topic. So clearly this is of global interest. So we're really excited to have you all here today. And even more excited, I have a greater pleasure to introduce the other people joining us today, which is Dr. Will Eiserman and Dr. Terry Faust, who are honored to have join us. Let me provide a little background of each of them. Dr. Eiserman is the Associate Director of the National Center for Hearing Assessment and Management that we in the U.S. know as NCHAM at Utah State University, which operates the National Resource Center on Early Hearing Detection and Intervention. He's also the Director of the Early Childhood Hearing Outreach, or ECHO, initiative at NCHAM, which is funded by the Maternal and Child Health Bureau and the Office of Head Start, which serves Head Start as a national research center on early childhood hearing. Under Dr. Eiserman's direction, the ECHO initiative has expanded the use of OAE hearing screening across the United States in early Head Start and early care and education environments, leading to increased identification of children birth to 3 years of age with hearing loss. The ECHO initiative also houses one of the largest databases on early hearing screening outcomes, which is informing future hearing screening practices in early care and education settings. We're pleased to have Dr. Eiserman with us today. In addition, Dr. Faust is joining us. He's a pediatric audiologist and speech-language pathologist at Intermountain Healthcare, where he's the director of school and community clinics. Dr. Faust has also served as the primary audiology consultant to NCHAM's ECHO initiative since its inception. Dr. Faust, along with Dr. Eiserman and other members of the ECHO team, has provided training and technical assistance to hundreds of early care and education providers in developing and implementing OAE screening and follow-up practices. Having worked throughout the nation, as well as in diverse international settings, Dr. Faust has a broad range of clinic and program development experience and expertise. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I think we're going to have a really good chat with everyone, so thank you. One thing I want to say before we get started is ECHO is a federally funded program in the U.S., and as a result, they cannot endorse or promote a particular product or manufacturer. They support early care and education service providers in the use of OAE screening and follow-up practices. You can go to their website, kidshearing.org, to learn more about this initiative. So thank you again both for joining us today. I think the first thing is to really discuss why is preschool screening so important. We tend to keep in mind that we all know about newborn hearing screening, and we all feel very comfortable with knowing why we do that. And if we look statistically, numbers are easy to document and write down, that we're comfortable with research. And we know that the importance of newborn hearing screening, that 3 out of 1,000 infants are born with hearing loss, and that a newborn hearing screening pass is really only valid at the time of screening. Many of these children are never screened again until they go to school, or unless a problem is suspected. And here you see some of those general statistics regarding preschool and school-aged hearing loss. I think some of these things that we forget is that, one, as I mentioned previously, that once they're screened at birth, that screening is only valid at that time. But we forget that this number is almost doubled by the time they go to school, 6 per 1,000, where these children have temporary hearing loss due to middle ear infections, or even as they get older, there's permanent noise-induced hearing loss. And I think we forget about some of these things. But maybe Will or Terry, you could put this in a more real situation for us. Can one of you discuss it a little bit further or a little differently than I did?
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that. This is Will, and thank you for the opportunity to get to share some of this information and to introduce ourselves to all of you in so many different places. One of the main
Yeah, of
things
course.
that we have learned is that every time we initiate an effort to periodically screen children subsequent to the newborn period, we find children who had not been previously identified, whether that's because they were not screened at birth or they were lost to follow-up, or because they had a late onset or progressive hearing loss that may have resulted after that newborn period. So um, the most important take-home message is that when we continue to screen, we continue to find. And those late and progressive hearing losses can occur and be identifiable at any age, and may be the result of illness or physical trauma or environmental or genetic factors. And a lot of early care and education providers are not necessarily aware of that. In fact, I think I can confidently say that at least within the U.S. context, there is an assumption that is made by many people, whether that is parents, educators, or even healthcare providers, that hearing is a stable condition, that if a child passes a newborn screening, then that is a good indicator forever of that child's hearing status. And we know that that is not the case, that as with all screenings, whether it's hearing or many other types of health screenings, a screening is an indicator of the child's hearing status at the time of the screening. And so we want to continue to screen throughout the early childhood period, partly because we know that there are increased risks for late and progressive loss, and also because this is such a critical time in a child's development when they're learning language and developing literacy skills and socialization and all of these things we wouldn't want to have disrupted by an unidentified hearing loss, particularly because we now have easy-to-use technology that enables us to remove that barrier from these children's journeys throughout their early childhood period. Terry, did you want to add anything else to that?
Oh, I think you summarized that well. I think that another reason that it's really important is one of the points that we really are going to emphasize on the next slide, which maybe we can just go ahead and go right to that, which is that based on the research, the incidence of permanent hearing loss doubles between birth and school age. And I think that that's really an important point to make. This has been based on research that has come out prior to our working with children 0 to 3 with otoacoustic emission screening, which was reported and summarized through the American Speech and Hearing Association and the American Academy of Audiology, but it's really been supported by our research with the Early Childhood Hearing Outreach Project as well. William, I don't know if you want to mention how many children we have in our current database now, but it's well over
20,000.
20,000 children, which I think would represent probably the largest cohort of that exists. And we have followed these kids in a variety of settings, from early childhood settings, from early Head Start, preschool, clinic settings, community clinic settings, and when these children are screened and then followed up with an appropriate protocol, our research also supports that incidence doubles between birth and school age. I think it's probably important to note, too, that there are areas of the world in which the incidence of childhood hearing loss is higher, in areas, for example, that don't immunize against maternal rubella, for example. And so, many of us could be working in areas where this incidence or the incidence of hearing loss is even higher.
And let me just add, this is Will, let me just add a couple of other remarks as well, that when we're using the word preschool here, and I wanted to just clarify that, at least in the U.S. context, the designation of preschool really is 3 to 5-year-old children, whereas our focus has been primarily on birth to 3-year-olds. But we can include that entire age group in this conversation of birth to 5. But the important point from our experience has been that because our focus has been on birth to 3, we are finding that when programs intently follow children through the follow-up protocol, we're finding almost 3 per 1,000 with permanent sensory neural hearing loss by the age of 3. And so when you look at the research that is predicting that we would see that rate by school age, this would suggest that perhaps that number is even greater.
Could be.
And there are some studies that indicate that it could be as much as 9 children per 1,000 as opposed to 6 children per 1,000 by school age. So that's just an important context to remember. And the underlying message is that when we continue to screen, we continue to find. But it all hinges on a couple of key elements that we're going to go into. And, one of those is having, really quality equipment, and we'll talk about some of those features, and also having a solid and clearly understood follow-up protocol for those that are doing screening to follow on children that don't pass. I mean, that's really the critical piece of this. And, we'll just remind everybody that kidshearing.org includes lots of resources for both planning for OAE screening, learning how to do it, as well as resources for having documentation strategies and a follow-up protocol, which are also essential in making all of this work. So we invite you to go there and to communicate with us through that website if we can be of any further assistance. Jill?
Super. That's great. Yeah, that's great. And again, one thing that you said a couple of times that I heard in that is if we continue to follow, we'll continue to find. And I think those are really, really powerful words. So thanks for that. And I think I'd love for you to go through this slide, Will, if you don't mind, because I found this in one of your PowerPoints and asked if you would share this with us.
Yeah, I'd be
Do you mind
happy
to go through this for me?
No, I'd be happy to.
Great.
So I think that people who are involved in the early lives of children, whether that's parents or preschool teachers or healthcare providers, have become very sensitized to the importance of language development being at the heart of cognitive development and social emotional growth and getting ready for school. Most of those professionals as well as parents know that we want to help stimulate a child's language as early as possible, talking to them and creating language-rich environments, reading to children as early as possible, and really inviting them into the world of language. And so people talk a lot about this, and it's at the core of a lot of curriculum and policies and practices that we see both in health and educational settings. What is not talked about as much is that hearing health is at the heart of language development. And yet it only takes a moment to actually pause and think about that of course, if we are going to be promoting language development and being very conscientious and energetic about that we need to be similarly conscientious and committed to monitoring the status of hearing particularly throughout this early childhood period of birth to 5, when language acquisition is so critical, because it sets the stage for all of this ongoing cognitive development, social emotional development, school readiness. It's all at the very heart of that. So we always want to remind people who are taking an interest in hearing that this is an opportunity for you to advocate and to help others become aware that any time you hear people talking about the importance of language and incorporating that as a core component in an education or healthcare provision context, that you also integrate monitoring the status of hearing.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. So I think when we talk about how important it is, then we have to recognize, how do we do this? Obviously, we have pure tone audiometry and otoacoustic emissions, and the gold standard has always been, or we've always thought it was, pure tone audiometry, and that's the recommendation for over 3 years old, because we can condition those children to and instruct them more easily than that 0 to 3. Obviously, we can't tell a 1-year-old to raise his hand when he hears the beep. So in your kidshearing.org and those programs, the recommendation is that you've learned over time is that OAE is the way to go, and that it is okay for this population. And what I hope that you can explain to everyone is, why is it okay? If pure tone audiometry has been considered the gold standard for so long, why is OAE okay? And I think the words that you've used to describe it is that 0 to 3 OAE screening, it's accurate and feasible. And why do we know that? So can one of you take these 2 words and describe, why is it accurate and why is it feasible?
Yeah, thank you, Jill. This is Terry Faust, and I appreciate that you're pointing this out, because if we've worked again with that large data group of children that I mentioned earlier, we have really shown that it's accurate and feasible. And so if we're to talk about it being accurate, the first thing with children 0 to 3 is that it doesn't require a behavioral response. Like you mentioned, we don't need them to learn to raise their hand or condition them to a tone or a sound. And so it doesn't require a behavioral response. And it's feasible, meaning it's practical and it can be easily implemented. And we have shown that lay or non-professional people can easily learn to screen children with otoacoustic emissions. In fact, that's probably a really important point that we probably should have mentioned earlier, is that through all of the work that we have done with the research we've published and the database of kids, those children have been screened by non-professional lay screeners. Often they are just people that are caregivers in the child care settings that we have talked about. Many of them don't have secondary education or degrees, but they have learned to successfully screen. And so when we talk about feasibility, I think that's really important, that we've shown that lay or non-professional people can easily learn to screen children with OAE.
And Terry, can I just chime in here, please?
Please do.
Yeah, and part of what makes it so feasible is that all of the equipment provides an automated response that doesn't require any interpretation. And that allows us to train people, and training is important, but with a modest amount of training, just about anybody who is good with children, who knows how to entertain a child, can learn to use the equipment and then document the very clearly defined results that they get from the equipment.
So I think that actually rolls into the next of it being quick and easy, and easy being easy for the child and easy for the person providing the test.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly, Jill. It should be quick and easy. It's fast. We really look for equipment you know, with all of the equipment that we have used, we really look for the equipment to be able to perform and complete the screen in less than 60 seconds. So it is fast. It's easy to use. One of the hardest parts that we find in training lay screeners is learning to get a good probe fit. But other than that, it is easy to use. And like we mentioned earlier, and I wanted to emphasize again that it's the automated equipment that makes it easy. We look for equipment that has just 1 or 2 button pushes to actually get that screening started. And again, it doesn't require interpretation by the screeners. Being automated with a pass or refer response and or even error messages that help our screeners to make adjustments there makes it easy. And so
And let me just add something too here. Part of what makes it easy, though, is that you've had not only good equipment, but you've had some good training. This sounds self-serving, but we have 11 training modules on our website that are free for everybody to use. We're not selling anything here. We want to have everybody have success. And
Right.
and so we really encourage you that if you purchase OAE equipment, that you don't skip the important step of really making sure that your screeners learn all of the elements of learning how to do this, because it can be easy, but it can also be very frustrating if you haven't taken a few minutes to really learn how to do it. So that is
right.
important to point out too.
I think, in fact, that ensuring that your screeners can feel comfortable and have some success with it makes the difference on whether they continue to screen or not.
Yeah, yeah. And then for the sake of time, I'm going to just keep moving forward. And this is one thing I've heard Will and Terry both say, is that OAE screening for children means it's no longer appropriate to rely on selective test methods. And these, again, these subjective methods, raise your hand when you hear the beep, that have been around so long. What's wrong with them, and why shouldn't we use them any longer? Can you expand on that a little bit? Either one of you, that's fine.
No, absolutely. You know, with subjective methods, what we're really talking about there are things like parent questionnaires, where we ask the parents about auditory behaviors that they've seen in their child, how their child seems to respond to sounds. And so we're getting their subjective impression, or it's crinkling a paper or ringing a bell, things that really wouldn't be controlled for us to know that the child is actually responding to that sound. And those, you're right, those have been around for a long time, but as we started, those methods were still in use in programs. But now that we have the ability to provide an objective screening where we don't need to rely on someone else's impression, either a caregiver's impression or our own observation of a child's response to sound, but we can get an objective measure of inner hair cell or inner ear function. That's the best screening that we can provide, and we want all kids to have that.
Great, thanks.
I wanted to just say one quick thing, Jill, that we skipped over that's really important, and that is that the OAE screening is a flexible screening approach, meaning that we can screen in a wide variety of environments, which is awesome because we can go to where children are. We can do it in their homes, we can do it in their preschool settings, we can do it in a doctor's office, we can do it while they're sleeping, while they're awake, while they're playing with a toy relatively quietly. So it really allows us to reach children wherever they already are.
Yeah. And on that topic of the equipment and being able to bring it wherever you need it, one of the things I noticed on the website, in addition to all of the other great tools on the kidshearing.org website, is a nice checklist that someone could use to help them select OAE screening equipment. And while there are a lot of considerations on that list, can you talk a little bit, if you had to choose the 4 top things when selecting equipment, in your opinion, what are those top? You gave me the top 4 things. If we can discuss them a little bit in detail of why you selected those top 4 out of the many things on that list, why you selected those 4 things. So test
Oh,
speed.
yeah, sure. So, yeah, thank you, Jill. These top 4 are ways or things that were important to us because in order, again, if you remember when we talked about it being feasible, we had to have equipment that would work in the settings where these children were and would work with lay screeners. And test speed is important to us because as anyone who works in screens with kids, we have a small window of time that we can work with them, and just a small amount of time that they're going to let us at their ears and put that probe in there. So it needs to be quick once we're ready to screen.
Okay.
And that test speed is important too within you know, the variety of environments in which we screen as well.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that we've got there is easy to understand screens and messages. That relates to speed in the sense that if our screeners don't have to navigate through difficult menus, that helps them get through the test and work quickly with a child. But also if the screens and messages are helpful to them to make adjustments as they screen, such as they get an error message that may tell them they need to refit the probe or somehow gives them information to help them more successfully complete the screen, that is really helpful. Probe and ear tip fit, I'm going to say, is one of the most important things because the less time that they have to spend, a screener has to spend trying to get a good probe fit, the easier and better that screening is going to go. So to have a probe and ear tip covers that work well is really essential. It's one of the, when we talk with our lay screeners and we say, what was the hardest thing for you and the thing that made you most uncomfortable, it would be probe fit and ear tip selection. But once they have experience with it and we come back 6 months later, it's one of the things they will tell you that they've improved and feel most comfortable with later. Probe cord length was important to us because many of the pieces of equipment were initially used in newborn screening. They'd have a short probe cord because that unit could be laid right there by the baby that was swaddled and sleeping and could be tested. But when we're working with kids that are now toddlers and mobile and walking, we may need to keep our hands busy with them and have the equipment on the floor or on a table or have somebody else holding it, but we need to have a cord that's long enough that as they move we're not pulling that probe out.
I see.
And so there's just 4 examples of things to consider when selecting equipment. I think one last thing, and William may have some others, but what I do want to say with selecting equipment is that it's really important. I think that the equipment programs select and their ability to be successful with it will determine the success of their program, whether they put it on the shelf in frustration or if they continue to screen. And
yeah, I think that's why the piece on the website, again, kidshearing.org, is that big long checklist, and it's so great along with the other equipment or the resources that are available at kidshearing.org, along with the whole library of information that's there, including the videos, are so helpful. And I know that we're right at the end. I don't know if we can get to some questions. Anders, do you have anything that are there some questions for us? And any last additions of anything you want to say to clean up at the end? Any final words from Will or Terry?
We're happy to field any questions subsequent to today's webinar. If you'd like to email us through our website, there's a Contact Us button at kidshearing.org that we're happy to help with. And we can provide training both remotely as well as in person to a certain extent, and our website resources will help with that as well. We want you to be successful. When you purchase equipment, we want you to have success, and that's why we are in place.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been really great. Anders, do you have anything?
Well, we did receive one question here that's asking, when the child is born, we have to screen as the first step. But when growing up, which are the tests that you recommend before the child turns 5 years old? Tympanometry, ASSR, audiometry with VRA. That's the question here. Can you elaborate or answer a little bit on, in addition to what you went through in the presentation?
Sure. So, you know, we, like Jill mentioned earlier, that screening result from newborn screening is a snapshot in time right there, right then and there. And we counsel people in our screening programs that's a valid result, and we can rely on that for about 6 months. But we want to continue to screen. And so, and then when we talk about methods to do that, we did touch briefly here today that pure tone screening is appropriate for kids that are approximately 3 years of age up to 5, as long as they are able to learn the response condition and provide an appropriate response to pure tone. Some of those kids can't. Sometimes up to 20% may not be able to do that for various reasons. And then the kids, of course, that are much younger. And that's really the purpose of our webinar today, is to really emphasize and underscore that the use of otoacoustic emissions to provide periodic screening for children 0 to 3, and perhaps those even older that can't be tested using pure tone, that it's a very appropriate, accurate, feasible method to use.
Thanks for that, Terry. So I think out of those pieces that the person asking the question who mentioned tympanometry, VRA, ASSR, it's not that those are not appropriate tests. They indeed are, but a good place to start might be OAE, that it could direct you to the use of some of those other tests. But yeah, OAE is probably a great place to start as a screening test.
That's right. Oh, and Gillette really, for all of us, should remind us to, when we talk about this, we're talking, you know, the differences with screening and the definitions of screening versus further testing and diagnostics and use. And so those tests that are mentioned there are very appropriate and have a very important place in our test battery. But when we're just talking about initial screening and population health, then what we talked about today is a great way to go.
Yeah, that first stepping stone. All right. Is there anything else, Anders, or are we taking up everybody's time past our time?
I think we'll close the session here for today. Thank you everyone for attending. Just wanted to mention that after we close up here, a feedback form will appear on your screen, which we will appreciate if you take the time to complete. Yeah, thanks to Will and Terry and Jill.
Yeah, I have one last question, if I could. This is Will. I noticed that today's session is being recorded. Will it be posted anywhere that people could share that with those who weren't able to attend today?
Yes, definitely. The presentation will be posted on the website otometrics.com/webinars, and we will also send out the presentation as an email link to everybody who did sign up.
Super.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.